the Target UPSC Prelims 2024 revision series, and in this section we will be covering the second episode for the subject economy. So this is for Prelims 2024 current affairs revision series. So let's begin with the economy episode 2. So the first topic is about India's coffee. So the coffee sector of India. So why was it in news? India ranks 6th globally in coffee production according to statistics. All over the world, India ranks 6th, and leading coffee producers are Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia, Indonesia, Ethiopia and Honduras. So we know that the African continent is also basically very famous for coffee, and then coffee production, if we talk about, then the leading producers are Brazil and Vietnam, and India is at 6th position. Then South Indian coffee blend gains attention for its health benefits. If we talk about from India's perspective, then it is the South India and specifically the region of the Karnataka. Then chicory and milk are emphasized for their positive effects in South Indian coffee. So there is a root, or you can say a plant, which is named chicory. So that basically plays a major role in Indian coffee. Now about South Indian coffee blend. So the mixture of coffee and chicory powders and the unique flavor and characteristics due to the blend. So the coffee and the chicory powder, when it blend together, it gives a unique flavor and characteristics to it. Now let us know few things about chicory. So what is it? It is a herb which is native to Europe and Asia. So it is basically a plant or a herb which is native to Europe and Asia, and it contains inulin. Which is a starchy substance and which is beneficial for health. So see, what is a chicory? It is a herb which is native to Europe and Asia, and it contains inulin, and inulin is a starchy substance. Then the mild laxative properties and reduces swelling. So it is helpful in reducing swellings. It is rich in beta carotene, which offers protection against oxidative damage. Rich in beta carotene. And the absence of caffeine in chicory complements coffee, which contains caffeine. So the coffee is rich in caffeine, while chicory does not contain caffeine, and that is why coffee and chicory blends together well. Now with regard to the health benefits of coffee, so it gives protection against oxidative damage. Then it reduces the risk of type 2 diabetes, which is a harmful diabetes, and you can say that the most harmful diabetes, which can actually take a toll on one's life also. So it reduces risk of type 2 diabetes. Then it reduced risk of age related diseases. So it is good for the people who are aging. Then coffee with milk and potential health benefits. Coffee with milk. Then the South Indian filter coffee often served with hot milk, and the South Indian filter coffee is actually very famous, and it is served with hot milk, and milk enhances taste and flavor. And there is a research from the University of Copenhagen which suggests anti-inflammatory effects of coffee with milk, and the combination of proteins and antioxidants in milk may contribute to this effect. Now history and commercialization of coffee in India. So what is coffee's history and about its commercialization in India? So that is, it was introduced during the late 17th century, and the initial arrival marked by smuggling of 7 coffee beans from Yemen by an Indian pilgrim in 1670. So it basically started to come in the country through smuggling. Then the Dutch occupation in parts of India during the 17th century contributed to spreading coffee cultivation, and the coffee cultivation in India is basically and mainly with regard to the South India and the Karnataka region, you can say the Coorg. Then the commercial coffee farming flourished during the British Raj in the mid 19th century, notably in the Mysore region. So that is the Karnataka region. Then coffee plantation practices in India. So what are they? They are predominantly grown under thick natural shade. So it is not that they are grown very much under the sun. It actually requires a shade. It is located in ecologically sensitive regions of the western and eastern Ghats. So western and eastern Ghats, you can say that they are basically grown in the peninsular India. Now about export and domestic consumption. So around 65 to 70% of India's coffee production is exported. So more than 50%. Exactly you might not remember, but you should know that more than 50% of India's coffee is exported and remaining is consumed domestically. Now coffee plantation locations in India, that is Karnataka, Kerala, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Odisha, Manipur, Mizoram and other northeastern states. So North India is not there in the production of coffee. It is basically the southern Indian states and the northeastern states. Major coffee producer, Karnataka contributes approximately 70% of India's total coffee production. Now this is important because nowadays we see that in prelims examination, facts are also being asked. So you should know that Karnataka contributes approximately 70%. So more than 50% of the production in India's coffee sector production is coming from a single state. Then coffee varieties in India, so that is Arabica and Robusta. Now let's talk about the Coffee Board of India, a point from where the question can come in the examination. It was established under Section 4 of the Coffee Act 1942. So Coffee Act 1942 operates under the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Commerce and Industry Ministry. It consists of 33 members including the chairperson, and the chairperson serves as the chief executive. The headquarters is located in Bangalore. Nowadays the headquarters are being asked, be it UPSC or PCS examination. So knowing about the headquarters also become important. So headquarters is Bangalore and the main activities include research, extension, development, market intelligence and promotion of coffee both domestically and internationally. So this is the aspect from where the question can be asked. So you should know it is established under Coffee Act 1942, Ministry of Commerce and Industry. Then the headquarters is Bengaluru. Next comes the IRDAI Vision 2047. So the 2047 vision of IRDAI. And what is IRDAI? IRDAI stands for the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India. So in India, the authority which looks into the perspective of insurance sector, so that is IRDAI. So IRDAI has launched the Vision Insurance for All by the year 2047. So the target year is 2047 and the vision is Vision Insurance for All. And who has launched it? It is IRDAI. The initiative aims, so the aim of the initiative is to increase insurance penetration in India. So, and the insurance penetration can be of any type, be it health insurance, term insurance, vehicle insurance. So, overall increasing the insurance penetration in India. And IRDAI has allocated states and union territories to insurers as part of this vision. So, the states and union territories have been involved in this. Then what is the IRDAI vision of 2047? So the objective is that insurance for all by 2047 aims to ensure every citizen has adequate life, health and property insurance cover. So type of insurance are there and every citizen, it is talking about that every citizen should be covered under it. Then the aim is to appropriate insurance solutions to every enterprise. So to provide appropriate insurance solutions to every enterprise. And the aim is also to make the Indian insurance sector globally attractive, because as of now the insurance sector of India is not very high, even though the numbers are increasing, but they are increasing at a slow pace. So specifically with regard to the medical insurance, the awareness and the penetration of it is very low. So the insurance sector in India needs to take a boom. So the pillars of IRDAI Vision 2047, that is insurance customers, that is policy holders, then insurance providers, that is insurers, then insurance distributors, that is intermediaries. So there is one party, there is second party, and in between there is intermediaries. Now focus areas of IRDAI Vision 2047. So what are the focus areas? So focus areas is specifically about offering appropriate products to the right customers, because many a times the mismatch can be seen that the product is different and the customer needs something else. Then establishing a robust grievance redressal mechanism. This is also very important, and one of the major problems in our country also, you can say that whatever the customer might take it, but after that if the customer faces any kind of problem, so the grievance redressal is very poor. Then facilitating ease of doing business in the insurance sector, and overall the ease of doing business, India is performing well in that aspect and is improving. The ranking is improving with each passing year. Then ensuring regulatory architecture aligns with market dynamics and promoting innovation in the insurance sector, so that new innovative ideas can come up through which the penetration of insurance within the country can increase. Enhancing competition and distribution efficiencies. So the efficiency needs to improve. It means that with less number of time, or in less time, the number of insurance holders should increase. Then mainstreaming technology and transitioning towards a principle based regulatory regime. So a regulatory regime can also be talked about. Now what is IRDAI? That is Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority of India. Important aspect. This is also the point from where the questions can be asked, because the regulatory bodies questions had been asked in the past. It was established in 1999 as a regulatory body. Regulatory body means a body which talks about regulation, and it keeps an eye on the things which are going on in that particular sector, and if any kind of malfunctioning or any kind of forgery is found, then these regulatory bodies take an action against it. Then the aim is to protect the interest of insurance customers. So the interest of insurance customer needs to be protected. Then the statutory body under the IRDA Act 1999 under the Ministry of Finance. So IRDAI is under the Ministry of Finance and it is an statutory body. Now this becomes important that it is an statutory body. It means it is made by an act, and that is IRDAI Act 1999. Then it regulates and develops the insurance industry, monitoring insurance related activities. So it also regulates it and it also develops it. Two important words is regulate and develop. Then powers and functions defined in the IRDAI Act 1999 and Insurance Act 1938. So the powers of IRDAI and the functions of it are defined under the Act. Important point that it is a regulatory body, it is a statutory body, it comes under Ministry of Finance and it is made by the Act IRDAI Act 1999. Then next is new tax rules for online gaming platforms. Online gaming platforms, as the online gaming platform was very much in news recently. So why was it in news? So the Central Board of Direct Taxes, that is the CBDT. So the CBDT has introduced new tax rules for online gaming platforms in India. So new tax rules has been introduced in India with regard to online gaming industry. And these rules focus on clarifying and establishing guidelines for tax deducted at source, that is TDS, on winnings from online gaming. So the TDS which was the TDS which was there on any kind of winning amount on the online gaming, so a clarification and the guidelines has been established with regard to that. And the introduction of these rules impacts the taxation framework surrounding the online gaming activities in India, making it significant news, because after this TDS at the winnings of the online gaming industry and the tax which was put on it, this became a very big news in our country. Now about new tax rules. So what were the new tax rules? It was that the online gaming platforms won't deduct tax at source if the net winning is below rupees 100. So if someone is winning rupees 100 or low, then TDS will not be cut. Offering relief to players with smaller winnings. So 100 and less, TDS will not be cut. Bonus, referral bonus and incentives provided by gaming companies are taxable deposits. So if anyone would be getting any kind of bonus or referral bonus or incentives, so that will be taxable, subject to tax under Rule 133 of the Income Tax Act. So that will be taxable. Then the calculation of net winnings will consider each user account separately, even if a user has multiple accounts. So imagine that if there is one person and that one person has 3 accounts. So it will not be that all 3 accounts, there will be only, see, calculation of net winnings will consider each user account separately. So if any person has 3 accounts, then all these 3 accounts will be considered different. It will not be considered same because it belongs to a single person. All 3 will be regarded as 3 different entities. Then the valuation of winnings in kind will be based on fair market value. Important point, that it will be based on the fair market value, that is FMV. And TDS at a rate of 30% will apply to net winnings from any online gaming platform. So this digit you should remember, that it will be 30% TDS that will be applied on any kind of net winnings more than rupees 100. Then impact of new tax rules for online gaming. What is the impact of it? So it increased tax burden on online gamers. Now imagine that whatever amount they will be winning more than 100, they will have to pay 30% TDS on it, and 30% is a big amount. Now imagine if someone is winning 100 rupees, so from that 100 rupees, 30 rupees will go in as TDS. So this will increase the tax burden on online gamers and this will reduce their income. And the impact on professional gamers and streamers, potentially leading to higher taxes and more complex financial management. Important word here is that the tax rate has increased, so higher taxes will be applied. And then you have to remember 30% TDS and fair market value. Then esports organizations may need to adjust financial models and consider tax implications for revenue streams. Financial implications and potential reduction in gaming income. So financial implications and potential reduction in gaming income, because if the tax will increase, then the benefit will be reduced. Now what is CBDT? Important aspect from where the question can come. Then it is a statutory authority operating under the Central Board of Revenue Act 1963. So it is a statutory body, part of the Department of Revenue within the Ministry of Finance. So it works under the Ministry of Finance. Then it provides input for policy and planning of direct taxes in India. Now what are direct taxes? Like for example, income tax, cooperation tax. These are the kind of direct taxes. Direct taxes include income tax, cooperation tax, and it is responsible for administering direct tax laws through the income tax department. So it works through the income tax department. Statutory body, Central Board of Revenue Act 1963, comes under Ministry of Finance, provides input for policy and planning of direct taxes in India. And what are direct taxes? Which you pay directly. Then comes next, and that is LIBOR, which stands for the London Interbank Offered Rate. London and interbank. Interbank means between the banks. Now why was it in news? So the RBI, that is the Central Bank of India, that is the Reserve Bank of India, it has instructed banks and other regulated entities, to shift from the LIBOR to alternative reference rates. So it has asked, the RBI has asked the banks and regulated entities to shift from LIBOR to the ARR, that is the alternative reference rates. This transition aims to decrease dependence on a benchmark like LIBOR, which is vulnerable to manipulation. So if it is about manipulation of any kind of currency or any kind of financial decision, so it will be vulnerable to it. So the transition from LIBOR to ARR is with regard to decreasing the dependence. The shift is crucial for maintaining stability and integrity in the financial system, making it a significant news, because the stability of the financial system is of utmost importance, because if stability will not be there, then unstable situations will create vulnerability in the market. Then let us know about LIBOR. So what is LIBOR? Important point, that is the London Interbank offered rate. So what is it? It is a widely used global benchmark interest rate. Interest rate. So what is the interest rate? Interest rate means the rate which it charges if it gives any kind of amount to anyone. Like for example, if you go and take any kind of loan from the bank, they say that the per annual interest rate would be 5%, 6%, 7%, 8%. So these are the interest rates. So LIBOR is a widely used global benchmark interest rate. It is used globally. Then it represents the average interest rate at which banks estimate they can borrow from each other in the London interbank market for specific time periods. So it is the interest rate at which the banks can borrow from each other. It means one bank is taking amount from the other bank, and then other bank is taking amount from the third bank. So interbank. Important reference rate for settling trades in various financial instruments like futures, options, swaps and derivatives. So this will also be an important reference rate. Now let us talk about the calculation. So banks submit their estimated borrowing rates to Thomson Reuters daily. So banks, they submit their borrowing rates daily, and the extreme rates are removed and the remaining rates are averaged. So if it finds that there is any kind of extreme rate, like all the banks are in the range of 5 to 8, but one bank is charging some 12-13%, so that will be removed, and all the remaining interest rates, they will be averaged together. Then the LIBOR rate is determined based on this average. So whatever average will come, then that average will decide the LIBOR rate, aiming to represent the median borrowing rate. Now what are the reasons for RBI moving away from LIBOR? What are the reasons for it? First is concerns over reliability, that is stability and integrity. So the LIBOR relies heavily on banks' honest and accurate reporting of their borrowing rates. So whatever borrowing rate banks report it on daily basis. Lack of consideration for banks' commercial interest creates opportunities for manipulation and misconduct. So if any kind of manipulation and misconduct takes place, then it might affect the LIBOR rate. And during the 2008 financial crisis, some banks artificially lowered their LIBOR submissions to appear more favorable. So it is up to the bank who can artificially also increase or decrease their LIBOR rate, and which is not right, and this is a wrong practice to be followed. Then about the integrity and fairness issue. So banks may alter their LIBOR submissions based on their derivative positions to maximize profits. So to maximize profits, the submissions can be based on their derivative positions. Then next, it raises concerns about the integrity and fairness of the benchmark. As I told you, that the manipulation and misconduct aspect can also come in between. Now let's talk about the challenges in shifting from LIBOR. What is the challenge? Then redesigning products linked to LIBOR. The products which are already linked to it, redesigning needs to be done. So redesigned with an ARR as the base, because if some shifting needs to be done, then the thing to which things are shifting, that needs to be prepared. Then technological and legal challenges, because till now things were in place with regard to LIBOR, now it needs to shift to alternate reference rate. Systemic and technical changes for banks. Systemic and technical changes for banks. So they need to identify products which are tied to LIBOR and determining overall exposure to it, and then shift that towards the ARR. Next we have RBI becomes net seller of USD in fiscal year 23. Net seller of USD. So why was this in news? So the RBI, which is the Central Bank of India, that is the Reserve Bank of India, it has experienced a notable change in its foreign exchange transactions during the fiscal year 2022-23, and after being a net buyer means that it was buying. So after being a net buyer of the US dollar for 3 consecutive years, so for 3 consecutive years RBI was net buyer of the US dollars, the RBI became a net seller, selling 25.52 billion USD in the spot market. So for 3 consecutive years it was net, for 3 consecutive years it was net buyer, but now it is net seller. So this shift in foreign exchange transactions is significant and likely to impact currency markets and monetary policies, making it newsworthy. Because see, if it is buying, and earlier for 3 consecutive years RBI was buying US dollars, but now it is selling US dollars. So when it is selling US dollars, it means that the amount they already have with them, or the quantity that they already have with them, is sufficient that now they can sell it. And selling US dollars also has many other implications. Now why and how did the RBI turn into a net seller in fiscal year 23? So what is the reason for RBI being net seller, that why the RBI was selling the US dollars? So first and foremost is the stabilization of the rupee, which provided RBI, the Central Bank of India, the power to sell US dollars. So RBI intervenes in the foreign exchange market to stabilize the movement of the rupee. So if rupee is not performing well, or is depreciating, or is becoming weak, then RBI will intervene, and if it is becoming strong, then also RBI will intervene. Then depletion of forex reserves and valuation losses. Now countries' foreign exchange reserves decreased during financial year 23 due to valuation losses caused by the appreciating US dollar and higher US bond yield. So see, bond yield is inversely proportional with regard to the price. So this is a relationship between bond yield and price. So the depletion of forex reserve, and now selling of dollars. So RBI sold significant amount of dollars in fiscal year 23 to counter the rupee's depreciation resulting from the Ukraine-Russia conflict. So Russia-Ukraine conflict actually played a very huge role, and for a significant period of time, even the share market of almost all the country also went to a huge low. Then next comes edible oil prices and significance for India. Now edible oil prices. So why was in news? The edible oils have undergone significant price volatility over the past 2 to 3 years. So the 2 to 3 years, and majorly the reason has been the Russia-Ukraine war, because the edible oil is produced majorly in that region, and the supply chain also got affected. So the global vegetable oil prices index for the UN Food and Agricultural Organization experienced a substantial drop during the peak of global COVID-19 lockdown in May 2020. So COVID-19 lockdown played a role, and then Russia-Ukraine war also played a role, and now the Israel-Hamas war is escalating it even further. So the index reached an all-time high in March 2022 following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and these fluctuations in edible oil prices impact global food markets, consumer spending, inflation rates, making it newsworthy. Global food market, because the rate of the edible oil increases, and consumer spending, because if the rate will increase, then consumers will have to spend more money to buy it, which might also lead to reduction in demand. Then inflation rates, because if too much amount will be increased, then this will lead to inflation in the market. Then factors for volatility in edible oil price. So what are the factors for it? So war between Ukraine and Russia, and this disrupted global supply of oilseeds due to closure of Black Sea ports, because the ships were moving through the Black Sea, and because of the war, Black Sea ports were closed. So the route has to be followed was a longer one. And Ukraine and Russia are one of the major producers, which accounted for nearly 58% of global production, causing prices to surge. So all over the world, 58, you can say that more than 50% of the edible oil is being produced in Russia and Ukraine, and these two countries are at war with each other. So when these two countries are at war with each other, so the production of edible oil was affected. So if the production is affected, it means that there is a shortage of edible oil in the market. And if there is a shortage, it means it will lead to the increase of prices. And if prices will increase, consumer will have to spend more from their pocket, and this will lead to inflation in the market. Then Black Sea Grain Initiative Agreement. So now it is about the Black Sea Grain Initiative. So this agreement was between Russia and Ukraine, and it was brokered by the UN and Turkey. And this facilitated safe navigation of vessels carrying grain and foodstuffs from designated Ukrainian ports. So under this deal, the ships which were carrying the food grains, they will be safely moving out of the ports, and attack will not be made on those ships. And it resulted in shipping out of accumulated sunflower oil, meal and seed from Ukraine, leading to international vegetable oil prices falling below pre-war level. So the all over prices, it fell below the pre-war levels. Now what was its impact on India? So it was the potential reduction in the price of edible oils. Potential reduction. So the potential reduction in the price of edible oils. So importing sunflower oil with a lower landed cost of approximately USD 950 per ton has the potential to significantly reduce the overall cost of edible oils in India. So if the import will be high and the production will be more, then the prices will go down. But if the import will be less and the production is also less, and the production in India is not sufficient to meet the domestic needs, so we import a lot of edible oil from outside. Now consumer behavior shifts. During price surges, households and institutional consumers like restaurants and canteens switched to cheaper alternatives like soybean oil or local oils. Now that the edible oil or the sunflower oil, these are expensive stuff, and if these stuff will become even more expensive, then imagine the situation like the restaurant or the hotel chains who are also serving food. So the prices will also go up, and if the consumer are not willing to pay that much of prices, then what will the restaurant or the hotel owners will do? So they will shift to other alternatives, and the other alternative needs to be in that price zone or the cheaper or the cheaper substitutes or the cheaper alternatives. Because the price, if the consumer is not ready to pay the higher price, then what will they do? They cannot keep ruining their business, so they will shift to cheaper alternatives so that their business keeps on running. With restored import flows and price parity, consumers are returning to sunflower oil, indicating a shift in consumer preferences based on price fluctuations. So price fluctuations needs to be seen, and price fluctuation needs to be kept in mind. Then now scenario of cooking oil consumption in India. About the consumption of cooking oil in India, what is the scenario? So India consumes 23.5 to 24 million ton of cooking oil annually. It is annual data. Annually means 1 year. Approximately 13.5 to 14 million ton of cooking oil is imported, while 9.5 to 10 million ton is produced domestically. So what we are producing domestically is lower than what we are importing. So it means that we are dependent on import for cooking oil. So if we are dependent on import, it means that the domestic production is not enough. Sunflower oil ranks as the fourth largest consumed oil, with consumption ranging from 2 to 2.5 million ton sunflower oil. Then mustard oil is the most consumed oil, followed by soybean oil and palm oil. So the most consumed oil is mustard oil, and if you will go in the kitchen of your houses, you will find, and if you will ask your mothers or your parents, then they will also tell you that what kind of oil do they use, and majority of the households use the mustard oil. So mustard oil, followed by the soybean oil, third position comes the palm oil, and fourth is the sunflower oil. And India is importing it. India is dependent on the imports because the domestic production is not sufficient. Then sunflower and palm oil are mostly imported. Sunflower and palm oil, it means that the third position and the fourth position oil is mostly imported. In contrast, mustard and soybean oil have higher domestic output, close to 100% for mustard and 30 to 32% for soybean oil. So basically it is the sunflower oil and the palm oil which we are importing on the majority of the basis. Soybean oil, we are domestically producing it for around 30 to 35%, and mustard oil, the domestic production is very high. Then exemptions on angel tax. So what are the exemptions on angel tax and why was this in news? So the CBDT, that is the Central Board for Direct Taxes. So the Central Board of Direct Taxes has proposed exempting certain categories of investors from the levy of angel tax. So angel tax is a type of tax, and the CBDT has said that certain category of investors will be exempt from it. So first, what is angel tax and what are those category of investors which are exempt from it? And the aim is to encourage investments in startups and reduce the taxation burden on investors. As we have just passed the COVID wave, and during the COVID wave, startups actually went through a lot of financial stress. And startups, if we talk about, or the MSME sector if we talk about, then they are considered as the running engine of the economy, because they provide so much of employment to in the country, and they also contribute so much in the exports of the country. You can say that more than 40% of the exports are coming from the MSME sector. So it is the startup which needs, and startup needs more investments. And the taxation burden on the investors should also be decreased, the investors who are investing. Then the CBDT's introduction of 5 new valuation methods for resident investors beyond the discounted cash flow and the net asset value methods is significant. So 5 new valuation methods for resident investors was also given by CBDT. Then these changes are expected to have a positive impact on the startup ecosystem and the investor sentiment, making it newsworthy. Positive impact it will have, as startup needs money, startup needs capital, and if waiver is provided to the startups, they will be able to generate or raise more funds. While on the other hand, the investors who are investing in the market and who are investing in the startups will also be incentivized. Then they will also be promoted, or they will also be feeling that they will also invest in the startups because they are getting benefit of it. Then what is angel tax? Now what is angel tax? So the angel tax was introduced in 2012 to discourage the generation and utilization of unaccounted money in investments in closely held companies. Now you need to understand this line. Be very clear with the words that are written. Introduced in 2012, fine. To discourage the generation and utilization of unaccounted money, you can also say the black money, the money which is not coming by the regular cycle through which the generation of money should take place, or the money which is not legal, or the money which is not taxable or tax exemption is promoted through it. So it is the unaccounted money in investment in closely held companies. So the money, the unaccounted money which is generated and utilized to discourage their generation and utilization in investments in the closely held companies. So overall the unaccounted money needs to decrease in the market. It is a tax imposed on funds raised by unlisted companies. Unlisted companies are the companies which are not listed on the stock exchange, through off-market share transactions if they exceed the fair market value of the company. Now let's understand this. So it is a tax imposed on funds raised by unlisted company. So the company who are not listed, those companies are raising funds, and those companies are raising funds through off-market share transactions. So the transactions which are exceeding their fair market value, so they are generating money, or they are raising money, they are unlisted, they are raising money which is more than the fair market value of the company. So the fair market value is being exceeded by the amount which they are raising. And the fair market value is the price of an asset when buyer and seller have reasonable knowledge of it and are willing to trade without pressure. So see, basically what is it? There is an unlisted company, and this unlisted company is raising money. How is it raising money? Unfair means, you can say, or it is raising money which is exceeding its fair market value. And when this company is unlisted and the raising money is more than the fair market value and the money is almost unaccounted, so this becomes a problem. So to discourage angel tax, that needs to be done. Then exemptions for government and recognized investors. Oh, we missed out on something in between. Okay, this is changes brought by CBDT related to angel tax. So what are the changes that has been brought in? Expansion to include foreign investors. So earlier foreign investors was not included in it, but now foreign investors has been included. So previously equity investment exceeding face value from resident investors was considered income for startups subject to income tax, but now foreign investors has also been included in it. So they extend this rule to foreign investors. It means that the startups raising fund from foreign investors would also be taxed. So raising money from foreign investors, now tax needs to be paid. Now exclusion, startups which are recognized by the Department of Promotion of Industry and Internal Trade are exempt from these provisions. So whatever startups are being recognized by the DPIIT will be exempted from this. Now comes next, that is exemptions for government and recognized investors. What are the exemptions for them? Government and government related investors, so that is central banks, sovereign wealth funds, international or multilateral organizations, or the government ownership of 75% or more. So they will be getting the exemption. Then banks and entities involved in the insurance business, entities registered with SEBI as category 1 foreign portfolio investors, FPI, that is the foreign portfolio investors, endowment funds and the pension funds. So these are the things which will be getting exemption from the angel tax. Then broad-based pooled investment vehicle or funds with more than 50 investors. So the funds with more than 50 investors and the hedge funds will not be including in it. So these are few of the things with regard to the angel tax. See, what becomes important with regard to the angel tax is that what is the exemption on it and who have been included recently, what is angel tax and what are the changes that has been brought. Then we studied about the factors for volatility in edible oil prices. So we studied about the edible oil prices and significance for India. And edible oil prices, always remember the Russia-Ukraine war, and the Ukraine and Russia are the biggest producer. Then comes the RBI becomes net seller of USD. Earlier for 3 years it was net buyer, but now it has become net seller. Then we studied about the London Interbank Offered Rate, that is LIBOR. New tax rules for online gaming platforms, always remember 30% TDS. Then IRDAI Vision 2047, important from mains perspective also. Then about India's coffee, this becomes important because nowadays in the preliminary examination also we are seeing that the facts are being asked. So this was it in economy. This was it in economy episode 2, and stay tuned for more episodes like this as we will be covering more topics in the coming episodes. So that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Till we meet next time, keep reading, keep writing, and keep subscribing to the channel. Thank you.
For more informative content, like, share and subscribe, and do not forget to press the bell icon to get the notifications.